The Council's response to the failed blockade was predictable. They made things worse. If military threats would not work, they would apply economic pressure. Within a week of Admiral Kresch's withdrawal, the Council issued a complete trade embargo against humanity. Any species trading with humans would face punishment. Any station allowing human ships to dock would lose Council money. Any independent merchant doing business with Earth would be banned from Council space. On paper, it should have been devastating. Humanity was young in space travel with limited factories and few mining operations outside their home system. They depended on galactic trade for rare materials, advanced technology, and access to established supply networks. On paper, humanity should have collapsed within months. In reality, something entirely different happened. The first crack in the Council's plan appeared within days. The Trellan Confederation, a minor member species that had always been pushed aside by the Council's power structure, announced they would not honor the embargo. Ambassador Torin's speech was brief and sharp. "My daughter lies in a medical facility partially paralyzed by a Council official's weapon," he declared. "That same Council now asks me to turn my back on the only species that stood up for her, that demanded justice regardless of the cost. I will not do this. The Trellan Confederation will continue trade with humanity." The Council's response was swift. Economic punishment against the Trellans, removal of trade privileges, and threats of expulsion from Council membership. What they did not expect was that the Trellans had been preparing. Within hours of the punishment being announced, the Trellan Confederation signed a mutual defense and trade agreement with United Earth. More cracks appeared. The Vexian Assembly, a loose group of independent colonies that had always resented Council authority, declared neutrality and announced they would trade with whoever they chose. When the Council threatened punishment, the Vexians simply increased their trading with humanity, who were paying good prices and asking few questions. On Earth, the response to the embargo was typically human. They treated it as a challenge. President Chen reorganized Earth's entire economy to achieve rapid independence. Mining operations expanded throughout the solar system. Factories that had been running at half capacity switched to full wartime production. Research programs that had been theoretical received unlimited funding. Captain Nina Foster, whose medical transport had sparked the blockade crisis, became an unlikely symbol of human resistance. She continued running supplies to human outposts, now using routes through neutral space that the Council could not legally block. Her ship had been painted with a simple message: "They can't stop us all." She was right. Within a month of the embargo starting, over 200 human vessels were operating throughout unclaimed space, establishing trade relationships, setting up outposts, and generally ignoring the Council's attempts at isolation. Each ship that was stopped resulted in 10 more taking different routes. On station outreach, Lisa Grant was running what had become a shadow diplomatic network. Species that could not officially trade with humanity due to Council pressure were finding creative solutions. Resources would be sold to neutral third parties who would then sell to humans. Technology would be abandoned in specific locations where human salvage teams would find it. Information flowed through informal channels that the Council could not monitor. Kyle Patterson had expanded his small security team into something that resembled proper intelligence work. He coordinated with contacts across dozens of stations, tracking Council ship movements, identifying potential allies, and occasionally engaging in activities that could generously be called industrial theft. "The Council is starting to panic," Kyle reported during a briefing. "They're realizing the embargo isn't working. If anything, humanity is expanding faster now than before." Lisa nodded, reviewing reports. "We're angry and we're motivated. The Council gave us a common enemy and a clear goal: prove we don't need them. Turns out that's pretty good for unity." What the Council failed to understand was that they had accidentally triggered something deep in human nature. Humans were most dangerous when they felt cornered or when they saw injustice. The embargo and blockade had activated both triggers at once. Back on Earth, a young engineer named Pete Collins had been working on theoretical faster-than-light drive improvements. Before the crisis, his work had been low priority. Now, with unlimited resources and a desperate need to move ships faster than Council vessels, his theories were being tested rapidly. 3 months after the embargo began, Pete achieved something remarkable: a new drive system that was 30% more efficient than the standard galactic model. It was crude, unstable, and required constant maintenance, but it gave human ships a significant speed advantage. Within 6 months, every human military vessel and most commercial ships had been upgraded. The Council first learned about the new drives when they tried to intercept a human convoy near the frontier. The Council patrol, expecting an easy catch, watched as the human ship simply accelerated away at speeds they could not match. The report that reached the Council was alarming. Humans had achieved a major technological breakthrough while supposedly isolated and cut off from galactic resources. What the Council did not know was that the drive technology was just the beginning. Earth's research programs, driven by need and funded without limit, were making breakthroughs across multiple areas. Materials science, weapons technology, shield systems, sensors. Areas where humanity had been decades behind were suddenly seeing rapid progress. The turning point came 6 months after the embargo began. A Council enforcement fleet intercepted what they thought was a lightly armed human transport. The transport was actually the newly built heavy cruiser Freedom, designed from scratch using Earth's latest technology and crewed by veterans who had trained for exactly this scenario. The Council fleet commander, expecting an easy capture, opened fire with disabling shots. The Freedom's shields, based on entirely new principles, absorbed the impacts easily. When the Freedom returned fire, its weapons tore through Council shields like they were not there. 3 Council ships were disabled before the fleet commander ordered retreat. The Freedom did not pursue, instead broadcasting a simple message. "We warned you. Leave us alone." The footage of that fight spread across the galaxy faster than the Council could stop it. For species that had grown used to Council military power, seeing their ships beaten so decisively was shocking. For species that had been pushed around by Council power, it was inspiring. Within days, 3 more minor species declared neutrality and began trading with humanity. Within weeks, there were talks of a formal alliance of non-Council species with Earth at its center. The Council's attempt to isolate humanity had instead sparked the beginnings of a rival power group. In the Grand Archive, Kelthir was no longer alone in his concerns. A growing number of Council members, particularly those from species that remembered the old warnings, were beginning to question the strategy of confrontation with humanity. Councillor Draven, who had initially dismissed Kelthir's research, requested a private meeting. "Tell me honestly," Draven said, his voice heavy. "How bad could this get?" Kelthir pulled up the ancient texts. The old civilizations tried to control humanity once, about 12,000 years ago, during Earth's Bronze Age. A Korvax expedition decided that humans would make useful workers. They took several thousand humans, planning to use them as labor for mining. What happened? Within 3 generations, the humans had completely taken over the Korvax operation. They learned the language, the technology, the command structure. Then they staged a coordinated uprising that captured every ship in the fleet. The Korvax commander's last message was 8 words. "We tried to tame wolves and created demons." Draven was silent for a long moment. "How is this not common knowledge?" "Because the Korvax Empire was embarrassed and wanted to bury it. They classified the reports, and over time, the records were lost or destroyed, but some accounts survived. The pattern is always the same. Humans can be negotiated with, can be reasoned with, can even be beaten in fair fights. But if you try to dominate them, if you try to remove their freedom, they become absolutely unstoppable. We've created exactly that situation," Draven said quietly. "It gets worse," Kelthir continued. "Humans form bonds not just with their own species, but with anyone they see as being treated unfairly. Every species we've pressured to stop trading with them, every punishment we've applied, we've potentially created more allies for them." Events proved Kelthir's analysis correct. When the Council applied additional punishment to the Vexian Assembly for trading with humans, a human fleet arrived in Vexian space within days. The fleet commander, Carrie Blake, made her intentions clear. "The Council seems to think they can bully anyone they want," Blake announced on open channels. "We're here to show that those days are over. Any Council fleet that enters Vexian space will have to deal with us first." It was bold. Humanity, barely a spacefaring species a year ago, was now offering military protection to other civilizations. The Council dismissed it until they actually sent a fleet to pressure the Vexians and found themselves facing not just human ships, but a combined force of Vexian, Trellan, and human vessels. Station outreach floated on the edge between Council space and the wild frontier. It was a trading hub where species from across the galaxy could meet, do business, and interact without the strict rules required in official council territory. About 50,000 beings from over 100 different species called the station home. Commander Lisa Grant was humanity's official representative on the station. At 34 years old, she was young for a diplomatic posting, but her quick thinking and political skills had earned her the job. She worked with a small team trying to build relationships and improve humanity's reputation among the galactic community. Her head of security was Kyle Patterson, a former Marine who had seen combat during Earth's unification wars. Despite his intimidating appearance, Kyle had proven excellent at reading people and had helped Lisa avoid several diplomatic problems in their first 6 months on the station. Life on Outreach was hard, but manageable. Humans were tolerated if not welcomed. There were insults. Some species refused to trade with humans, and Lisa's team was often excluded from important meetings. But they kept trying, slowly building connections with other marginalized species who understood what it meant to be looked down upon by the Council's elite. Everything changed on day 247 of their posting. A Korvax trade delegation arrived, led by Ambassador Vren, a high-ranking official with direct connections to the Council. Vren was known for his arrogance and his particular hatred of humanity. He had been one of the loudest voices arguing for restrictions on human activity. The trouble started at a neutral bar where different species gathered to relax. A group of human traders sat in one corner, celebrating quietly after a successful negotiation. At another table, Vren and his delegation conducted loud business, dictating terms to nervous merchants. One of Vren's assistants, a younger Korvax named Zelix, had been drinking heavily. He walked to the human traders' table, his face twisted with contempt. "So the primitives are allowed to drink in civilized places now," Zelix said loudly. "Someone should tell management they allow vermin in here." The human traders, led by a merchant captain named Greg Murphy, tried to ignore the insult. Greg had been trading in frontier space for 3 years and had learned that responding to insults usually made things worse. But Zelix was not finished. "I heard your species still kills each other over religious differences," Zelix continued, swaying, "that you have regions of your planet where people starve while others feast. And the Council wants to treat you as equals? You're barely better than animals." Greg stood slowly, his jaw tight. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall, with the build of someone who had done hard physical work for years. "I think you should go back to your table." Kyle Patterson arrived just as the situation was getting worse. He moved between Greg and Zelix, his voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen, let's all take a step back." Zelix made a dismissive gesture. "Another primitive. Does Earth send only brutes to represent them? Where I come from, we use trained diplomats, not military thugs." Kyle's expression did not change, but those who knew him could see the dangerous stillness that came over him. "Sir, you're drunk. I suggest you return to your delegation before this becomes an incident." What happened next changed everything. Zelix reached for a weapon, a neural disruptor that was technically illegal on the station but which Korvax officials carried anyway, protected by diplomatic immunity. He did not point it at anyone specifically. His hand was unsteady and his finger slipped on the trigger. The neural disruptor fired. The shot missed its unintended targets but struck a young Trellan child who had been walking past with her family. The girl, no more than 7 years old, collapsed instantly, her nervous system overwhelmed by the weapon's energy. For a moment, everything stopped. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. The Trellan child lay motionless on the floor while her parents screamed. Station medical personnel rushed to help. The diagnosis was terrible, severe nerve damage, possibly permanent. She might never walk again, might never fully recover brain function. Kyle moved before anyone could process what had happened. He disarmed Zelix with a quick, efficient motion that showed years of training. Greg and the other human traders secured the scene, preventing anyone from leaving. Lisa Grant arrived within minutes, her diplomatic training fighting with her human horror at what had just occurred. Ambassador Vren arrived shortly after, his expression cold. "Release my assistant immediately. He has diplomatic immunity and this was clearly an accident." Lisa stood her ground. "A child has been seriously injured. Immunity doesn't cover careless discharge of an illegal weapon." "The weapon is not illegal for Council diplomats," Vren corrected. "And I will determine what immunity covers. Now release Zelix or Earth will face severe consequences." Kyle still had Zelix restrained, the Korvax struggling weakly. With respect, Ambassador, that's not going to happen. Not until station authorities arrive and file a proper report. Vren's eyes narrowed. You dare to physically restrain a member of a council delegation? This is an act of aggression. I will see that humanity's status is revoked entirely. You will be banned from all council space. Station security arrived, led by Chief Morrow, a Zenthari who had always been fair with all species. Morrow quickly assessed the scene. The injured child being rushed to medical, the restrained official, and the standoff between the human and Korvax delegations. Ambassador Vren, I'm placing Zelix under station custody pending investigation, Morrow announced. Vren's face darkened. You have no authority over council personnel. This is a neutral station, Ambassador. Council diplomatic immunity doesn't apply here unless I choose to recognize it. Given that a child has been seriously injured, I'm choosing not to. Morrow gestured to his team. Take him into custody. What happened next would become the spark that ignited everything. Vren made a signal and suddenly his entire delegation was armed, weapons appearing from hidden holsters. It was a clear violation of station rules, but Vren clearly believed his position put him above such concerns. No one is taking my assistant anywhere, Vren declared. This human security thug attacked him without cause, and the accidental discharge was self-defense. That is the story that will be told to the council. Kyle's voice was dangerously quiet. That's not what happened, and you know it. I know what I choose to know, Vren replied. And the council will believe me over your primitive species. Now step aside or I will have you removed. Greg Murphy spoke next, his voice carrying across the now silent bar. You know what I find interesting? You council types always talk about how violent humans are, how aggressive, how we can't control ourselves. But right now, we're not the ones waving guns around. We're not the ones who shot a child and tried to cover it up. Maybe you should think about that before you call us primitives. The standoff lasted for nearly an hour. More security arrived, as did Lisa's entire team. The tension was thick. Everyone aware that one wrong move could trigger a fight that would kill dozens. The Trellin family stood nearby, the father holding his unconscious daughter, tears streaming down his face. Finally, Ambassador Vren blinked first. He could see that other species on the station, even those who had no love for humanity, were watching with disapproval. Shooting a child and then trying to use immunity to escape was a bad look, even for the council. Very well, Vren said coldly. Zelix will submit to station justice. But know this, Earth will pay for this humiliation. I will personally see to it that humanity is expelled from all council space and cut off from galactic trade. Your species will be locked in your own system, and any ship that tries to leave will be destroyed. This is not over. Zelix was taken away. The Trellin child was moved to the station's best medical facility, with human doctors volunteering to help. Across the station, word spread about what happened. A council official shot a child. Humans stood up to him, and Ambassador Vren had threatened an entire species as punishment. Lisa sat in her office that night, writing her report to Earth. Kyle stood nearby, troubled. We did the right thing, Kyle said, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. I know, Lisa replied, but Vren wasn't bluffing. The council will make an example of us. They'll ignore that we protected an injured child and focus only on the fact that we defied a council ambassador. The report reached Earth within hours. It also reached the Galactic Council, where Ambassador Vren made good on his threat. Within 2 days, a resolution was introduced to quarantine humanity to their home system, citing their pattern of aggressive behavior. On Earth, the response was immediate and unified. The incident had been recorded by multiple sources, and the footage spread across Earth's networks. People watched as a Korvax official shot a child, as humans stepped in to help, and as Ambassador Vren threatened their entire species for refusing to let the criminal escape. The United Earth Assembly met in emergency session. The debate was short. Humanity would not accept quarantine. If the council wanted to treat them as enemies, then enemies they would be. The Trellin child, whose name was Yenna, remained in critical condition. Her family received support from dozens of species, including substantial help from the human delegation. The message arrived everywhere at once. Council headquarters on Viridian Prime, Earth's capital in Geneva, over 300 major stations and settlements throughout known space. It came from the frontier, from a region considered too dangerous for exploration. The message was simple, urgent, and terrifying. This is the research vessel Nova. We found something. It's not human. It's not from the Council. It's alive. It's massive. And it's heading toward inhabited space. We need help. Everyone's help. Now. The Nova was a joint research vessel crewed by humans, Trellans, and Vexians, a symbol of the new alliance that had formed against Council pressure. They had been exploring an unusual energy signal in deep space when they found it. A living creature the size of a small moon, moving through space on its own, consuming everything in its path. The recordings the Nova sent were shocking. The creature, if it could be called that, was unlike anything in any species database. It fed on energy and matter without distinction, breaking down everything from asteroids to starships into raw fuel for its growth. Worse, it was reproducing. The Nova's scans detected at least 7 smaller creatures traveling with the massive parent, each still large enough to consume a space station. Dr. Helen Ward, the Nova's chief scientist and a human, provided analysis that made things even worse. Based on the creature's current path and speed, it will reach the outer colonies of the Vexian Assembly in about 3 months. Council space will be next, with Earth following within 6 months. If it continues feeding and reproducing at the current rate, we're looking at dozens of these things within a year, potentially hundreds within 5 years. The message ended with a plea that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. This isn't a human problem or a Council problem. It's a survival problem. We need to work together or we all die. In the Council chamber, the initial response was predictable. Some members argued it was a human trick, a fake crisis to force the Council to end the conflict on good terms. Others worried it was real, but suggested letting the creature destroy humanity's frontier colonies first, weakening them before the Council acted. Councillor Draven, who had spent 2 years studying the ancient archives, changed the discussion. He stood before the Council and spoke with unusual force. I have spent 2 years reading the old texts. Do you know what I learned? Every major crisis in galactic history was overcome by cooperation. Every time our ancestors faced an extinction threat, they survived by setting aside differences. And every time they failed to do this, entire civilizations died. He displayed the recordings from the Nova again. This is real. These creatures will not stop at humanity's colonies. They will not negotiate. They will simply consume until there is nothing left. And if we are too proud to work with humans to stop this, then we deserve what happens. The debate continued for hours, but Draven's words had shifted the momentum. Finally, after centuries of considering themselves the unquestioned authority, the Council did something unprecedented. They asked humanity for help. On Earth, President Chen received the Council's message with mixed feelings. Satisfaction that the Council had finally been forced to acknowledge humanity as equals. Concern about whether they could actually stop this threat. We need to see this thing ourselves, Chen told her advisors. And we need our best people working on solutions. Contact Captain Morrison. Tell him to take the Defiant to meet with the Nova and assess the situation. And contact the Council. Tell them we accept their proposal for a joint task force, but make it clear. This is a partnership between equals. Jake Morrison received his orders while on patrol. Carrie Blake read the mission briefing and whistled low. A space monster the size of a moon. Just when I thought things couldn't get stranger. At least it's a simple problem, Jake replied. No politics, no diplomacy. Just figure out how to kill something that really needs killing. The Defiant met with the Nova 3 days later, along with a Council observation. Fleet led by Admiral Kresh, the former commander of the failed Earth blockade, had been quietly brought back after his refusal to fire on. Civilians had been reframed as wise restraint Kresh, and Morrison met via video link, both carefully professional. Captain Morrison, Kresh began. I believe this is our first formal communication since the blockade incident. Admiral, Jake replied with a slight nod. Under the circumstances, I think we can agree to set past differences aside. Indeed. I've reviewed the Nova's data. This is beyond anything in our experience. We need to coordinate if we're going to find a solution. What followed was an intensive research effort that brought together the best minds from multiple species. Dr. Ward's team from the Nova worked alongside Council scientists, human weapons specialists, and Trellan mathematicians. The creature, dubbed the Devourer by the research team, defied easy understanding. It was partially organic, partially energy-based and seemed to exist partially outside normal physics. Traditional weapons were tested and found useless. The Devourer's outer layers could heal faster than conventional weapons could damage them. Energy weapons were partially absorbed, actually feeding the creature. Physical weapons had some effect, but the creature was so massive that even nuclear explosions barely scratched it. A young human physicist named Rita Morgan made the breakthrough. She had been studying the creature's energy patterns when she noticed something odd. "It's not actually breaking physics," she explained to the research team. "It's using them in a way we've never seen. Look at this energy signature. See how it moves? That's not random. It's a pattern." Dr. Ward leaned forward, studying the data, like a tuning fork. "If we could find the right frequency, we could break its internal structure," Rita finished. "The creature holds itself together through quantum connections on a massive scale. If we can break those connections, it should collapse." The theory was sound, but making it work was another matter. They would need to build a weapon capable of producing a precisely tuned quantum disruption field, powerful enough to affect something the size of a moon, and they would need to do it in less than 2 months. The collaborative effort that followed was remarkable. Council industrial facilities provided raw materials and manufacturing capability. Human engineers contributed their newly developed drive systems and power generation technology. Trellan mathematicians calculated the exact frequencies needed. Vexian construction teams assembled the components. They called it the resonance weapon. The theory said it would work. The practice was untested. As construction proceeded, a second problem emerged. The weapon would need to be delivered to close range, essentially inside the Devourer's outer layers to work. It would be a one-way trip for the ship carrying it. Someone would need to volunteer for a suicide mission. Jake Morrison volunteered immediately. So did Admiral Kresh. So did over 500 other captains and crews from dozens of species. For the first time in galactic history, humans and council species were competing for the right to sacrifice themselves for the common good. The weapon was installed on a specially modified version of the Freedom, the human heavy cruiser that had proven itself in combat. The crew would be volunteers from multiple species. Command would be shared between Jake Morrison and Admiral Kresh, a symbolic gesture of unity. The Defiant would lead a support fleet whose job was to draw the Devourer's attention and create an opening for the Freedom to make its run. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. The final battle took place in the Helix Nebula. The Devourer was even more massive than the recordings had suggested, a living mountain floating through space. The smaller creatures, its offspring, flanked it like a nightmare escort. "All ships, this is Morrison," Jake sent to the combined fleet. "Stay tight, focus fire on the offspring first. We need to clear a path for the Freedom." Good hunting. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Over 200 ships from 7 different species, fighting side by side against a threat that cared nothing for politics. The offspring creatures were destroyed one by one, each requiring fire from dozens of ships. Several vessels were lost, consumed by the creatures they fought. On the Freedom, Admiral Kresh and a crew of 47 volunteers from 6 species prepared for their final mission. The resonance weapon was armed and ready. They just needed the opening. "Freedom, this is Defiant," Jake's voice came through. "We've cleared your path. Window is open for 30 seconds. Good luck." "Acknowledged, Defiant," Kresh replied. "It has been an honor serving alongside you." The Freedom accelerated to maximum speed, heading directly toward the Devourer's core. The creature's attention shifted. Massive arms of solid matter reached out to stop the ship. The Freedom's shields held, but barely. At the last moment, Admiral Kresh activated the resonance weapon. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The Devourer's entire structure began to shake at a quantum level. The connections that held its massive form together started breaking. The creature thrashed in what might have been the first pain it had ever felt, but it was not dying fast enough. The Freedom's shields were failing, the ship being crushed. The weapon needed more power the Freedom could not provide. Jake Morrison made a decision that would be remembered for generations. "All ships target the Devourer's core. Pour everything you..." The Council announced Earth's quarantine with formal ceremony and 12,000 years of bureaucratic tradition. The official statement cited humanity's continued pattern of disruptive behavior, refusal to follow proper diplomatic rules, and aggressive tendencies that threatened galactic stability. The job of enforcing the quarantine went to the Council's Third Fleet, commanded by Admiral Kresh. Kresh was a professional Korvax military officer who had spent 2 centuries maintaining peace throughout Council space. He was not given to political games like Ambassador Vren, but he believed firmly in Council authority. When given an order, he followed it without question. The Third Fleet had 47 warships, 8 heavy cruisers, 23 destroyers, and 16 support vessels. It was an overwhelming show of force, meant to make clear that resistance would be impossible. The fleet positioned itself around Earth's solar system, creating a barrier that would stop any ship from leaving or entering without Council permission. Admiral Kresh broadcast his message on all frequencies. By order of the Galactic Council, the Sol system is now under quarantine. All human vessels are ordered to return to Earth immediately. Any ship attempting to cross the barrier will be disabled and taken. This blockade will remain until humanity shows sufficient maturity and willingness to accept Council authority. On Earth, the United Earth Assembly watched the Council fleet take up positions. President Chen Wei, elected just 6 months earlier, stood before the Assembly to address both Earth's population and the watching galaxy. The Galactic Council has decided that humanity is too dangerous to be allowed freedom among the stars, she began, her voice steady. They point to an incident where humans protected an injured child and held an armed diplomat responsible as evidence of our aggression. They ignore that we built a unified world government from dozens of formerly hostile nations. They ignore that we eliminated poverty and hunger on our world. They ignore that we have consistently sought peaceful cooperation. She paused. The Council expects us to submit. They expect us to accept isolation until we learn to be more obedient, more willing to overlook injustice. They have made a serious mistake. President Chen's next words would be quoted for generations. Humanity has faced extinction events, global diseases, world wars, and the real threat of destroying ourselves with nuclear weapons. We have stared into the abyss and pulled ourselves back through pure stubbornness. If the Council believes a blockade will break our spirit, they understand nothing about us. Earth would not accept the quarantine. Human ships would continue to operate in unclaimed space. Any attempt to board or disable human vessels would be treated as an act of war. It was a line drawn in the stars. Admiral Kresh received Earth's response with mixed feelings. The soldier in him respected their courage, but the Council officer in him knew he had his orders. When the first human transport, the merchant vessel Horizon, approached the blockade 2 days later, he prepared to enforce the quarantine. Captain Nina Foster commanded the Horizon, a civilian transport carrying medical supplies to a human outpost. She had received the recall order and deliberately ignored it. As she approached the blockade, she broadcast on open channels. This is the Horizon. We are a civilian medical transport carrying critical supplies to a human settlement. We pose no threat to anyone. We will be proceeding through the blockade. Kresh responded personally. Horizon, you are ordered to turn back immediately. If you continue, we will be forced to disable your vessel. Admiral, Nina replied, with respect, you have no legal authority to stop civilian vessels in international space. Your blockade is an act of aggression. We will not be intimidated. The Horizon continued forward. Kresh gave the order, and one of his destroyers fired a warning shot. Nina did not slow down. The destroyer fired again, this time aiming to disable the Horizon's engines without serious damage. The shot never reached the Horizon. A human military vessel, the destroyer Armstrong, appeared from nowhere and blocked the blast with its shields. Captain Morrison's Defiant and 5 other human warships uncloaked around the blockade, their weapons powered but not yet aimed. Jake Morrison's voice came through on the open channel. Admiral Kresh, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Navy. You just fired on a civilian vessel. I strongly suggest you stand down. Kresh stared at his display in disbelief. The human ships had been completely invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Captain Morrison, you are in violation of the quarantine order. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. I don't think so, Admiral, Jake replied calmly. Here's what's going to happen. The Horizon is going to continue. My ships will escort it through your blockade, and you're going to let us pass because the alternative is starting a war that neither of us wants. I have 47 ships, Captain. You have 6. The numbers are not in your favor. You have 47 ships built to Council standards, designed for intimidation and peacekeeping against species that usually surrender at the first sign of force. Jake's voice remained calm. My ships were built by a species that has been fighting wars since we learned how to sharpen sticks. Every system, every weapon, every plan was designed by people who understand that war isn't about having the biggest fleet. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to win. Carrie Blake stood beside Jake on the Defiance bridge. 6 destroyers are moving to intercept. The rest are holding position. Jake nodded. Armstrong, Dallas, and Phoenix intercept those destroyers. Defiant, Challenger, and Endeavor will escort the Horizon through. Weapons free, but fire only if fired upon. What followed was a deadly game at incredible speeds. The Council destroyers moved to block the human ships, clearly expecting them to turn aside at the last moment. Instead, the Armstrong, Dallas, and Phoenix accelerated directly toward them, not changing course even as the distance closed to potentially fatal ranges. Admiral Kresh watched with growing alarm as his ships and the human vessels closed on each other at speeds that would make collision fatal for everyone. At the last possible moment, he gave the order to break off. The Council ships scattered and the human vessels shot through the gap. All human ships maintain course, Jake ordered. Horizon, proceed to your destination. The Horizon and its escorts passed through the blockade. The Council fleet, caught off guard by the humans' refusal to back down, had failed to stop them. It was a small victory, but its meaning was enormous. In the hours that followed, more human ships approached from different directions. Some were military vessels. Others were civilian transports with military escorts. Each time the Council fleet moved to intercept. Each time the humans refused to turn aside. And each time it was the Council ships that broke off. Admiral Kresh sent an urgent message to the Council. These humans are not behaving rationally. They are willing to sacrifice their ships rather than submit. Our current rules are ineffective. Request permission to use lethal force if necessary. The Council's response took 8 hours. Permission was granted. Council forces could use all necessary force to maintain the quarantine. The first test came when a human colony transport, the Plymouth carrying 500 civilians including children, approached the blockade. Admiral Kresh, following his new orders, moved his flagship into position and armed lethal weapons. Jake Morrison, who had been shadowing the Plymouth, immediately positioned the Defiant between the Council flagship and the transport. Admiral, I know you've received new orders, Jake said, but before you follow them, think carefully about what happens next. If you fire on that transport, you'll have to go through my ship first. And if you destroy the Defiant, there are 50 more human military vessels within range that will arrive within minutes. Most are captained by people who served with me, people who will be very upset that you killed me and my crew. Captain Morrison, I have my orders. Stand aside. My great-grandfather fought in what we called World War II, Jake said. His ship was sunk. He spent 3 days in the water before being rescued. When he recovered, they asked if he wanted to go home. He volunteered to go back to sea. Do you know why? Kresh did not respond, but he was listening. Because his friends were still out there, Jake continued. Because the job was not finished. Because humans don't give up just because things get hard. That transport behind me is carrying 500 people, Admiral. Families, children, people trying to build a new life. And I will die before I let you harm them. So will every captain in the human fleet. We're not brave, Admiral. We're just stubborn. The standoff lasted 23 minutes. Finally, Admiral Kresh made a decision that would end the blockade. He stood down his weapons and moved his flagship aside. Council Command, this is Admiral Kresh, he sent on official channels. I am withdrawing the 3rd Fleet from the Sol System blockade. These humans will not submit, and I will not start a war by firing on civilian transports. If the Council wants this quarantine enforced, they will need to find someone else. The message shocked the Council. Admiral Kresh was one of their most respected officers, and his refusal to follow orders was unprecedented. But his assessment was correct. The humans were not behaving as expected. They were supposed to be intimidated by superior force. Instead, they had called the bluff and won. The Grand Archive on Viridian Prime was the largest library in the known galaxy. It held 12,000 years of history, recorded in data files that stretched across underground levels deep beneath the planet's surface. Most beings never visited the lower levels anymore. The information down there was old, considered outdated by modern standards. Kelthir had worked in those forgotten levels for 300 years. He was a Xanthari, a species famous for their perfect memory and a love of preserving knowledge. While others worked in the bright upper levels with the latest information, Keltier preferred the quiet darkness below, where ancient secrets waited to be rediscovered. On an ordinary day that would change everything, Keltier found something strange. He was sorting through corrupted data files from before the Galactic Council even existed, when he discovered references to a species that had been erased from official records. The files called them humans living on a planet called Earth in a distant part of the galaxy. What made Keltier's skin prickle with unease were the warnings. Multiple ancient civilizations had written about humans, and their words carried a tone of fear mixed with respect. They described humans as persistence hunters who never stopped chasing prey once they locked on. They spoke of beings who formed family bonds so strong they would die for each other, even when they shared no blood. Most disturbing, the texts claimed humans were the only known species to tame deadly predators and make those predators love them. Keltier compiled his findings and brought them to Counselor Draven, a powerful official from the Korvax Empire. Draven barely glanced at the ancient documents before waving them away. "These are myths," Draven said dismissively. "We have been observing Earth for 50 cycles now. Humans just invented faster-than-light travel. They are young, emotional, and constantly fighting among themselves. They are nothing like these fairy tales describe." Keltier tried to protest, but Draven had already moved on to other matters. The Zenthari archivist returned to his work, troubled but powerless to do more. Far across the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the Defiant. Beside him was his second-in-command, Lieutenant Carey Blake. Both were veterans of Earth's unification wars, the bloody conflicts that had finally brought humanity together under one government. They had hoped that reaching the stars would mean leaving violence behind. Jake held a datapad displaying the Galactic Council's latest message. It was humanity's 5th rejection for Council membership. The reasons were always the same. Humans were too aggressive, too unstable, too dangerous. Earth could observe galactic affairs and conduct limited trade, but humans would never have a real voice among the stars. This rejection came with new restrictions. Human ships could not travel within 5 sectors of any Council core world. Human traders would face extra inspections and heavy taxes. Worst of all, humans would be required to carry special identification marking them as a provisional species. "They treat us like animals that might bite," Carey said, her fists clenched. "Like we're pets who haven't been trained properly." Jake nodded slowly. "They see that we're young, that we still have disagreements among ourselves, and they assume we're not ready. Maybe they're afraid of what we could become." Back on Viridian Prime, Keltier could not let go of what he had found. He dug deeper into the ancient archives, finding more detailed warnings. One report from a Vexian explorer named Thalas described observing a human tribe during Earth's Stone Age. A large predator had killed 2 human children. Instead of fleeing or accepting the loss, the humans tracked the beast for 6 days without proper rest. They ate and slept in shifts while always keeping the trail fresh. When they cornered the animal, they killed it with only sharpened sticks and stones. Then they thanked the creature for the food it would provide and carried every usable part back to their home. "They are grateful even to their enemies," Thalas had written. "They see death as part of life, not something to fear above all else. This makes them more dangerous than any species I have encountered. How do you defeat an enemy who has already accepted they might die?" Another ancient text described humans as beings who could run for days without stopping, wearing down faster prey through pure endurance. They could survive in frozen wastelands and scorching deserts. They told stories, passing knowledge through generations in ways that went beyond mere genetics. The old council had decided to leave humanity alone, to let them develop naturally. There had been strict rules: do not contact Earth until humans reached a certain level of technology. When that time came, handle them carefully with full understanding of what they could become. But those rules had been lost to time. The modern council knew nothing of these warnings. They only saw a young species that had not learned to control their aggressive nature. It never occurred to them that maybe humans had learned to control those instincts better than any other species in the galaxy. Keltier wrote a comprehensive report. He included translations of ancient texts, historical analysis, and his own conclusions. He marked it as urgent and sent it directly to the council chamber, bypassing normal channels. The report was immediately buried under hundreds of other messages. Trade disputes, border conflicts, economic sanctions, diplomatic protests. The concerns of one archivist about ancient myths regarding a primitive species barely registered as important. On Earth, the United Earth Assembly met in emergency session. Some called for defiance, arguing that humanity should ignore the Council's rules and explore wherever they wished. Others urged caution, saying that open rebellion would only confirm the Council's suspicions about human aggression. A compromise was reached. Humanity would obey the letter of the law while testing its limits. They would stay out of prohibited sectors but expand rapidly into unclaimed space. They would submit to extra inspections while building their own manufacturing and supply chains. They would wear the provisional species identification, but they would wear it with pride. Captain Morrison received new orders. The Defiant would lead an expedition into frontier regions, areas that were technically open, but which the Council considered too dangerous or worthless to explore. There, away from the Council's watchful eyes, humanity would establish outposts and build alliances with other marginalized species. As the Defiant prepared to depart, Jake stood on the bridge looking at the stars. Carrie joined him, and for a long moment neither spoke. "You know," Jake finally said, "my grandmother used to tell me stories about our ancestors, how they walked out of Africa and spread across the entire planet, how they crossed oceans in wooden boats without knowing what was on the other side, how they looked up at the moon and decided that empty rock was worth dying for." "What's your point?" Carrie asked. "My point is that we've been underestimated before," Jake said with a slight smile. "It never ends well for the people doing the underestimating." The Defiant jumped to faster-than-light speed, vanishing into the darkness. Behind them, Earth continued spinning, home to 8 billion humans who were only beginning to understand how large the universe truly was. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited, completely unprepared for what was coming. In the Grand Archive, Kelthir stared at his terminal, watching his urgent report remain unread. He felt a chill, a primal fear that his species had evolved past long ago. Something bad was about to happen and no one was listening. The ancient warnings had been clear. Never cage a human, never threaten their family, and never make them believe they have nothing left to lose. The Council had just done all three. The old texts spoke of what happened when humanity was pushed into a corner. The galaxy was about to learn those lessons the hard way.